And I am the facilitator for the evening, and my job is to make sure that we stick to this agenda and that everyone has the opportunity to share their opinion and thoughts. I'm joined with Jennifer Villasenor, Jeff Henderson, Erin Fansfield, and Hayden. Thank you. All part of the PNC and city staff. So I'm just going to run through the agenda here tonight. So we are currently doing a welcome. And next we will hear from Jennifer and Jeff about the general plan update project status, what's going on as of now. Then we will quickly move into the presentation about the land use alternatives and the process to get into those alternatives. And then we will have a discussion which will last about an hour and 20 minutes. And we will go through each of the land use alternatives and take your comments and have some questions answered. Then we'll move on to any other questions that the GPAC may have on matters and determining the upcoming meeting dates. And then at 8:45 we will have public comment, and we hope to adjourn at 9 o'clock. So I am going to pass it off to, I'd also like to remind everyone that we have these microphones that are around the table. Just make sure that you speak into the microphone when you have a question or a comment so that everyone can hear you. So we'll have to do a little bit of sharing of the microphone. And we have Erin and Hayden here that are taking copious notes so that we can make sure to capture everyone's thoughts and questions throughout the evening. And with that, I will pass it off to Jennifer and Jeff.
Thank you. Before we get started on the agenda and talk about the project timeline, there's a couple of housekeeping matters that we have to attend to. One, does all of the GPAC have a copy of the workbook? Everyone has, okay. And then the second sheet of paper you should have is an area for comments that was placed on all the chairs as well, and that's for you to leave comments in case we don't get to anything that you might want to mention. And then finally, the other handout that I'm going to pass on to everybody is a copy of what we have received from, it's basically correspondence from property owners of opportunity sites. So throughout this process, since we started the general plan update, we have had property owners reach out to city staff and say, can you include my property as a property that you evaluate in the general plan? And that's what those correspondences are. And we'll bring up what those specifically say as we get to each of the land use alternatives. Okay, so we'll roll that into the land use alternative discussion. I think that's all the handouts I have. And then one other bit of news was at the last city council meeting, the city council directed a streamlining of the general plan update process, and I mentioned it in the email that you all received. And what that does is basically says, make sure that we're only addressing what we need to address in order to satisfy our state law requirements, make sure that we are eligible for CEQA, environmental processing, streamlining, so we can take advantage of those things, but really stick to the required elements, make sure that we're addressing state law, and beyond that, we're really only addressing the guiding principles, the community vision, and then we've also streamlined the format, so the structure, which is something that the GPAC has already been discussing since the beginning. We've already had been going down the path of eliminating some of the elements, the air quality we talked about, road management we had talked about. So the GPAC had already been going down that path, but this direction goes ahead and solidifies it. And so it'll help us just to get right to the meat and potatoes of what we need to be doing. So, you can get the actual memo online, but if anybody has questions on that. It won't change the GPAC's role, but it will streamline the process, make the schedule go a little faster, and it'll help us to do our job more efficiently. With that, we'll talk a little bit about where we are in the timeline, the project overall timeline. We have finished through the goals. The last meeting we had with the General Plan Advisory Committee, we started to talk about the opportunity sites. At that meeting, we had that changing conditions map. It was a draft map. It showed 11 sites that were selected based on a market trends report, a task force, GPAC discussion, community engagement discussion and input. And so that's how that map came to be. We started to talk about that. Since that time, the project team has been evaluating each one of those sites further. And so tonight, that's where we start to talk about the 4 land use alternative sites. So went from 11 down to 4, and then some policies to cover some of the other sites that don't have necessarily alternatives associated with them. From there, after we have the GPAC discussion on the land use alternatives, we will bring that input forward to the Planning Commission and the City Council. And once that process is completed, we will have what we would call sort of the project description, the preferred alternative, some policy direction, and that will be what we study in the EIR going forward and what will become the draft general plan. Make sense? Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Jennifer. So this first portion of our presentation tonight is providing a little more detail on the process that Jennifer just outlined for us. It begins with this basic question of why do we prepare and consider land use alternatives in the context of updating a general plan. This is really a fundamental part of the general plan update. It follows on the vision and guiding principles that were developed. It is informed by the key issues that this GPAC discussed and essentially developed for the general plan update. And it's meant to provide a basis for the general plan land use diagram, which is a part of the land use element, which is one of the required elements of the general plan. And that land use element provides policy direction for, again, the next 20-year period on how the city should manage land use change that could occur within the community in a manner consistent with the vision and the guiding principles. That land use diagram is really a guidance document. It is meant to identify the distribution of different types of land use and different scales of land use throughout the city. A lot of what happens on that diagram is implemented on a day-to-day basis by the city's zoning code. So what the land use diagram does is essentially say it is the policy of the city to encourage different types of land uses at different intensities and densities at different locations. The zoning code essentially establishes the legal framework for accomplishing that. And so the two work hand in hand. What we will be dealing with today is primarily the land use side of the equation, the land use map side of that equation. After the city completes the general plan update, one of the first steps that we need to take is updating the zoning code or zoning regulations to correspond to any changes made to the land use diagram. And so really the general plan update is meant to be a framework where you can think more freely, if you will, about the types of land uses that could occur without being held to the limitations, if you will, of your zoning code as it stands today. The land use diagram really dictates changes that might occur to that code. And again, the land use changes that have been proposed, as Jennifer indicated earlier, we really streamlined those down to a more finite set of potential changes that are really meant to align with the community vision and the guiding principles, which have been posted here on the back wall, just as a refresher for the general plan update. Now, the process that we have followed included first identifying potential opportunity sites. And you'll recall from our previous meeting, this was done in large part with input from the Economic Trends Task Force that received and reviewed an economic trends background report identifying potential opportunity sites in the community that are potentially good opportunities for land use change. That information was reviewed with the GPAC at the last meeting. Then, from there, we've developed draft land use alternatives and policy recommendations for a number of sites. Those are detailed in the workbook that was provided to you for this evening's meeting. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to receive your input on those alternatives. And then from there, based on GPAC input on those alternatives, staff will finalize a preferred alternative and present that to the Planning Commission and City Council for their review and comment in the process of preparing what we refer to then as a preferred alternative, which then is the basis for the land use element itself. So that's sort of this linear process that we follow, and essentially this evening we're moving from step 2 to step 3, and then after this evening we'll move from step 3 to step 4 in that process. So I want to talk a little bit about how land use is organized on the alternatives maps that you have and on the land use diagram in the general plan. Your existing general plan includes a land use map, and a copy of that is provided in the workbook that you have this evening. And that map identifies what the envisioned pattern of land uses, the maximum development intensities, and densities within the city were envisioned to be back in 1996 when the plan was last updated. It doesn't necessarily reflect what's going on out on the ground today for a variety of different reasons. It could be that the plan was amended and a different type of land use took place. It could be that a use envisioned back in 1996 was simply never realized. It could be that the existing use on the ground is simply inconsistent and has occurred that way for some time. But what we tend to refer to is there's essentially the use on the ground and the use in the plan. And oftentimes they're aligned, but they're not always. The city's map includes a land use designation for every property or every parcel in the city. That land use designation identifies 3 things, the way that it's set up on the page. First, the land use category. What type of use is it? Is it commercial? Is it residential? Is it industrial at the most basic level? It also identifies the density and or intensity of development that's allowed on that site. In other words, how much development can occur on any individual property. And the third piece that it often includes is what the city refers to as an overlay that provides some additional policy guidance. The city has overlays for things like certain types of design that should be applied to sites. There are overlays for different levels of intensity they could apply to an individual site and a variety of other purposes. So that designation carries all 3 of those components. One of the reasons that the city seeks to update the general plan at this time is the way that has been constructed and implemented over time has been found to be very burdensome to staff to try to really break that down and understand, okay, what does the general plan really say about what can happen on this property? And because of the complexity of the existing plan, you often get different interpretations. And so one of the objectives of the update is to really simplify that process and make it more predictable, property to property, use to use, and proposal to proposal. The existing general plan uses 20 different categories to describe permitted development. And the legend that's printed up here on the screen is the actual legend from the existing land use diagram, where you see multiple categories of residential development, multiple categories of commercial, 3 different kinds of mixed use, 5 different designations of open space, 2 of public, and then an additional 1 for rights of way and bridges. Let's talk a little bit about the terms density and intensity. These are terms that we'll be using throughout the evening and through our discussion of the general plan. Both are used essentially to describe, at the most basic level, how much development can occur on a property. And that's one of the policies that the general plan sets forth, required by state law. The general plan sets forth for each and every parcel in the city at a policy level. The first concept is density. And density is typically used to describe the amount of either residential or mixed-use residential commercial development that can occur on the property. Density is most commonly referred to using the metric dwelling units per acre. In other words, the number of dwelling units that can be developed per net acre of land on a parcel. Intensity, on the other hand, is used when we describe commercial uses, industrial uses, and in turn also for the non-residential side of mixed-use development. And intensity is often expressed using what's known as a floor-to-area ratio, which is essentially taking the gross floor area of all the building area on a site and dividing that by the area of the lot, which gives you a simple ratio. And then land use designations carry different ranges of density and ranges of intensity with them based on location. Just a few examples of density, just showing you both sort of what it looks like in words, what it looks like as a diagram, and what it could look like, one representation of it as an image. This describes three different types of residential product. An attached single-family residential home, which is typically built at about 3 to 7 units per acre. An attached single-family residential home, which is built on that same acre at about 10 to 25 units, and a multiple family residential development, which would be more than 10 units per acre on that same acre. So again, shown in diagrams and in the image. So this diagram equates those types of development product across the top with land use designations down the side. So the city has, for example, 4 residential land use designations ranging from low density to high density. And in those designations, different types of products are permitted. When I say products, different types of housing stock are permitted. So that detached single-family residential could occur in either the low or medium. The attached single-family would occur in either the medium or medium-high. And then the multiple family residential would occur in medium-high and high. Same examples on intensity. So with intensity, we're now moving again to that ratio of floor to area. And the city uses there are three essentially different maximum FARs that are available in the existing general plan. A 0.35 to 1, a 0.5 to 1, and either a 1.0 or a 1.5 to 1. And in this example, really those middle diagrams are probably the most helpful way to visualize this. Is that you use the floor area ratio to show that with a, for example, a 0.5 FAR, you could cover half of the lot on 1 story, or you could cover a quarter of the lot on 2 stories. And that ratio gives you that flexibility to use that site in that manner, subject, of course, to any zoning restrictions the city may have limiting height in a location. The FAR is really meant to talk more generally about the amount of development that could occur. And similarly to the residential, the FARs are balanced across the different land use designations, and the city's existing land use designations, or actually those land use designations are shown along the left side, and the building intensity ranges that will be permitted in those are shown across the right side. And so with the building intensity for non-residential, there's considerably more flexibility inherent to the structure of it than there is, for example, for residential. Wanted to just take and show a general example of how the city's existing map works, and I think we may take the most complex one here for example purposes. But if you were looking at that purple parcel, that sort of oblong rectangular purple parcel here along PCH, the designation is mixed-use horizontal. That's indicated by the design. The F2, if we follow the density code chart, would show us that it's a maximum permitted intensity of 0.5 FAR. The 30 shows us that the maximum density of the residential component you could have there would be 30. The average 15 would indicate that that would have to be an average of 15. And then it's subject to a specific plan overlay. So we show this just to show sort of the complexity of the existing plan. And one of the desires that we've heard from the council, from the commission, from staff, is to really help to try to simplify this so that it's more understandable. So let's talk briefly about, that was essentially a brief overview of the city's existing structure. So the existing adopted general plan and the way that it lays out land uses. We're now going to transition to some of the proposals or some of the ideas that we have worked with staff to generate in the interest of simplifying the plan, consolidating some of the land use designations and bringing forward a revised land use designation system for use in the current plan or in the updated plan. And before we go to that, does anyone on the GPAC have any questions on densities, FARs, some of that structure? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the modifications that we're recommending to the land use designations. There are 3 new designations that we're recommending. In addition to those 3, we're recommending consolidating some of the existing ones. For the new designations, one that we're recommending is community service. The existing public designation on the land use map includes a whole range of things that are both publicly owned and operated, as well as a lot of uses that are actually privately owned, privately operated. Some might call them kind of quasi-public. And for that, we're proposing just essentially a retitling and a pulling out of some of those categories or some of those uses from public. And that new title would be community service. And this would include uses like hospitals, schools, and churches that serve community functions, but may not be publicly owned and operated. The second new category we're going to spend a little bit of time going into more detail shortly is called research and technology. This is essentially a light industrial designation that would really encourage emerging technologies and industrial development of a lighter character and potentially a cleaner character than, say, manufacturing or more traditional industrial use. This is only applied in the transform sites, which are one of the 2 categories of change sites that we discussed at the last meeting. If you look at the maps on the wall, and as Jennifer indicated, there are essentially 4 sites where we're considering land use change alternatives. This is a part of 3 of those 4 sites. So this really is in direct response to the economic vitality guiding principle, and a lot of what we've heard from the GPAC and from the public about the need to really encourage research and technology uses in the community in the interest of providing a better job space. The third change is a recommendation to look at the city's existing specific plans and use a specific plan land use designation on the general plan map to identify and essentially defer land use planning authority within a specific plan from the general plan to the specific plan level. This is a technique used by a lot of cities in California to essentially say that within this location, the policies of the general plan apply, but the land use distributions identified in the specific plan are the regulatory basis for land use. And this would be applied to areas within existing specific plans. On your current general plan map, the uses proposed in those specific plans are carried out and carried forward into the general plan, which creates some confusion when the standards in that specific plan are different than the broader standards in the general plan. There are also some merging of designations. The existing commercial recreation and water recreation designations are being combined into a simpler recreation designation. And we're also proposing to take the city's 3 different mixed-use designations and roll them into one, essentially just referring to that all as mixed use. What this gives us then is a range of land use designations that include residential, and there are 4 different designations proposed for residential. If you wanted to follow along with this portion of the presentation in your workbook, you could flip to any of the land use maps and we'll show you these ranges. The residential are categorized as low, 0 to 7 units per acre, medium, 7.1 to 15, medium high, 15.1 to 25, and high-density residential, 25.1 to 35. No changes to any of these designations or their ranges are proposed as a part of this reclassification, and no additional high-density residential designation is proposed as a part of any of the transformed sites. So just want to be clear on that point. On commercial, there would then be 5 categories of commercial use. Neighborhood commercial, 0.35 FAR, general commercial up to 1.5 FAR, regional commercial up to 1.75, visitor commercial up to 1.5, and office up to 1.0. Some of the FAR ranges in these designations have been expanded from those that are shown in the existing general plan. However, that expansion does not exceed the FARs enabled for these areas in the zoning code. To clarify that, there is at this point an existing inconsistency between the general plan and the zoning code with regard to the maximum FAR. What the general plan update does is essentially rectify that inconsistency by getting the general plan to match the zoning. But there is no fundamental change to the maximum permitted intensity of any individual property because they're still afforded that in the zoning code. With regard to mixed use, again, we're collapsing potentially 3 mixed use designations into one. That one mixed use designation would have a maximum intensity of 1.5 FAR. That could be developed fully with commercial uses, or could include residential uses at a maximum density of 25 units per acre, and that 25 units per acre has to fit within the 1.5 maximum FAR. I want to point out that 25 units per acre is the equivalent of what we were referring to as medium high density residential. So it's not the highest density range available, it's in the second highest. For industrial, there'd be 2 designations. First, the new research and technology, which would have a maximum FAR of 1.0. Secondly, the traditional industrial designation, which would have a maximum of 0.75. Jennifer's going to talk a little bit more about some of the rationale that led to the development of the research and technology designation.
First, does any of the GPAC have any questions on the land use designations that are being recommended or proposed at this point?
Okay. Hello? Okay. To me, I like that the streamlining, some of the designations, but it just seems like it comes down to the general plan really has no authority. The specific plan and the zoning override them at every level, as far as I can see. So is that correct, or do they have any, what's the point of having a density on the general plan if any specific plan is different?
The intent of the general plan update is to align these so that they're all consistent, and that the general plan provides the top level policy guidance and framework, and the specific plans and zoning code have to be in conformance with the general plan under state law. They simply have to comply.
The Bellatera thing is the density is way higher than any of the general plan density. So how does that match up?
So Bellatera, here, I think Bellatera is in the F14 category right now on the existing general plan.
Okay.
So they probably have if I can remember, Bellatera's designation is CR for commercial regional with an F14, which is the 1.75 and 45 units to the acre, and SP for a specific plan overlay. So you look at those, you have to go to each of those 3 to figure out what the general plan land use designation is. So when Bellatera was adopted, that's a specific plan. Specific plans are a little bit different. The general plan update isn't proposing to change any of the specific plans.
So then it's not consistent then?
It would still be consistent because what the general plan update is proposing to do, or what we're trying to do and sort of streamline it, is rather than have, say Bellatera, have a land use designation of CR F14 1.75-SP-PD. It'll just say SP for specific plan, and you go to the specific plan. Because in this case, they are consistent. Pretty much all of the specific plans that we have now are consistent, and the general plan are consistent. The only areas right now where we have inconsistencies with the zoning and the general plan when it comes to densities and intensities is that area that Jeff was talking about in some of the commercial, where that doesn't align. And what that does, it can be kind of problematic, let's say, when we are helping people at the counter, and the first thing people go to usually is the zoning code, and it'll say you can have an FAR of this. And then when we go to the general plan, the FAR is different, and trying to explain that to somebody can be, difficult. So this is going to rectify that.
I'm thinking like of the Alon's 100 units per acre. Where does that match to the general plan?
Well, the specific plan for Beach Edinger is, I think, a mixed-use zoning with a specific plan overlay. That specific plan doesn't have specific densities and intensities in that plan, but that is not part of the general plan update in terms of any of the changes that are being proposed to be made to the general plan. The specific plan is being updated, but that's on a separate course. So all the general plan update will do, let's say for that specific plan, the Beach Edinger specific plan, will create a specific plan designation of SP. That way, when there are changes to it, we're only changing the specific plan. We don't have to go in and change the general plan, if that makes sense.
No, but that's okay.
Jennifer will be available to answer more questions afterwards, but I want to move on. I think Dan had a question.
There was a bit of a gap in the residential densities you showed between 15 and 15.1. You have 15.05. I mean, how do you do, is that just, you round, just 15?
Yeah, you round always up.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the research and technology because that is truly the really only sort of new designation that's being recommended in all of this. Some of, the combination of some of the mixed use, the reclassification of hospitals from public to community service isn't really a new designation. The research and technology is a new designation, and as Jeff mentioned, it's proposed to be responsive to the guiding principles, the number one of which was prioritized as economic vitality. The other area it's supposed to be responsive to is some of what we saw in the market trends report, the economic trends report, what we talked about at the task force, what we talked about when we did our issues discussion here on the GPAC. So briefly, it's a new designation that will encourage emerging technologies supported by technology infrastructure, and it would integrate a mix of industrial and commercial uses. So, and it's only being proposed in areas that are currently designated as industrial. So those areas would not lose their ability to remain operating as industrial uses or with industrial businesses. And so we'll get into right now, I wanted to sort of talk about some of the trends and some of the data that kind of was the catalyst for creating this designation. In the market trends report, it showed from 2000 to 2012, you can see basically total employment is down almost 5%. Jobs per household, that's also down. Median household income in 2012 dollars, down 12.8%. And what's gone up is the median housing value, a lot. And then we have a 2011 statistic that shows that 85.9% of what we call primary job holders, so that doesn't include the self-employed or second jobs, of primary job holders that are living in Huntington Beach are commuting outside of Huntington Beach for their primary job. And converse to that, for 81.5% of the primary jobs that are in Huntington Beach, workers are commuting into the city from somewhere else. And that's largely because where the city has seen job growth has been in the service industry. So healthcare and service make up, I think, about 45% of the jobs in the city. Healthcare is a high wage sector, but the service industry, the wages for that, I think, are 50% below the median for the county in terms of wages. So those are just some of the statistics that we were looking at, saying, okay, what is the question that we're trying to solve, or how through the general plan, and in looking at our vision and our guiding principles, how do we align these things? So, in looking out toward the future, we know that research is showing that there's a forecast of increasing jobs in the city. We will see job growth, we will see the jobs household ratio improving, and what the market trends and economic trends analysis is showing is that diversifying the economy towards specialized engineering, some of these emerging technologies, research and development could create a greater percentage of jobs held by residents and improve the jobs household balance. The consultant that looked at the economic trends also points out that Huntington Beach's location, employment, strong manufacturing and industry sector, and the land use potential present high potential for growth in the technology, manufacturing, and technology service industries. There were a lot of businesses that were shown along the Gothard corridor and in the northwest section where you did have smaller companies that was defined as less than 20 employees that were starting to emerge in these fields, and there's potential for those to expand. But the city would have to make some commitments toward prioritizing these emerging technologies, the infrastructure, in order to have those companies stay and grow in Huntington Beach, and then also be competitive to get some of these other types of jobs. These two quotes are from the Economic Trends Task Force. One is, given the strong economic development emphasis on technology, manufacturing, and technology service sectors, preserving, improving, and expanding the industrial building inventory should be prioritized. So what that means is making policies and land use changes via the general plan update to support that, to incentivize, let's say, older industrial buildings, the reuse and the revitalization of them, supporting the infrastructure to allow these businesses to grow and to come into the city. And two of the critical job-creating neighborhoods are Gothard Street and the Northwest Industrial Area will likely experience significant transitions in industry and land use. These areas currently lack clear vision and long-term transition. The city should not miss this opportunity. So this was the reason why we're bringing the research and technology land use designation today, and why we'll probably spend, in 3 of the land use alternatives, we'll probably be talking about it a lot. The other part of the research and technology component is that it expands not just to allow industrial uses and these emerging technology type of uses, but it expands to allow commercial uses as well. And we see that if we're creating areas where there will be more jobs, and we want these jobs to stay in the city and come into the city, then allowing for some supporting commercial, and we provided examples of what that vision looks like. And many of you have probably seen some of these developments, the O.C. Martiniks, the lab, the camp, the Anaheim Packing House, those types of commercial developments that could support the businesses as well as the residential uses is what is sort of the project team was envisioning when we started to put this research and technology land use designation together. And the GPAC is where we're looking for the starting to look for the input on these ideas, and will help us to, if it is something that is supported, will help us to formulate further how we would envision this land use designation. Does anybody have any questions on research and technology?
I guess my question is, how do you define what is a research and technology use, and especially how is that different from, say, a light industrial land use?
It basically is a light industrial land use. The good thing when you create a land use designation is the next part to that is you create the zoning code for it, and that's when we get into permitted uses. So what we need to do as part of the land use designation is solidify or sort of round out what we see as the vision for this. What types of industry are we talking about? What types of policies do we want to put into this designation that we think, based on the information we have in the market trends report, based on our guiding principles, and what kind of policies would we need to include in this, and how do we shape the description for this research and technology classification?
My question here is, okay, suppose we go ahead and we redesignate in the general plan there's a couple of areas from from industrial to this research and technology use. Is there going to be a problem, for instance, when all of a sudden a manufacturing company, which doesn't quite line up, what we often think of as research and technology, what if all of a sudden they want to come in and actually occupy buildings or lots which are designated as research and technology? Are we going to be running into problems, say, with the conformance with the general plan, which could trigger an EIR if they want a new development? Could the landowner who owns the CUP, be in violation of this permit because this is not a research and technology use, it's a commercial land use? In other words, are we backing ourselves into a corner by saying only research and technology?
Not necessarily. One is the research and technology could allow for manufacturing uses to occur. And in the areas that we looked at for the land use alternatives, there wasn't much I would call heavy industrial where you would have a situation where you're making something non-conforming. Absent that, all of those existing uses would be grandfathered, so to speak. So they wouldn't lose their right to continue operating. And then again, as I say, when we look at the permitted uses, we want this, or I guess I should say, it's envisioned that this would be a flexible designation where, a lot of times, the businesses and the people that are coming up with these creative ideas for businesses and for technology and industry, a new medical device manufacturing, it's hard to envision what that might be for us. So if we can provide the flexibility for that creativity to occur, we have to think about it in that sense.
Right.
Jennifer, could you expand, Jennifer, on how the name change from industrial to research would attract other companies? Why wouldn't they come as it stands out with just the term industrial?
Well, it can be very difficult to come in and try to go through the process of getting a conditional use permit or bring a business in when there isn't the necessary, what I would call, technological infrastructure. So you have to come into a building and practically reinvent the space in order to make it work for your business. The policies that are envisioned for the research and technology would hopefully the city could commit to incentivizing in some way. We don't know what that way is until we get to the city council. allowing that to occur and potentially collaborating and making that happen.
So you see this as sort of a precursor to the city perhaps getting more involved in making this occur?
Potentially, it's kind of the land use response to an economic development strategy.
Sorry, I can't see your name.
Sorry, Diane.
Dan, thank you. Dan?
I had a question in reference to the visuals here. They all look very retail. And you're talking about a research and development corridor. I can certainly see the compatibility, but that all looks like retail to me.
Yeah, the reason why I did that was because all of the text and write-up was on the industrial part of it, the technology, but I didn't want to minimize that you could have supporting commercial, and so use the pictures to show the types of commercial that could potentially go into these areas. But it's not to say one is more of an emphasis over the other, it's just to illustrate that they're both permitted.
But there would be no residential.
No.
Question. So, in opposing this argument, part of this driving it is running the ratio from 1.03 to 1.1, which is residents who live and work in the city of Huntington Beach. So I live and work in Huntington Beach, I've been doing it for years, and I appreciate that, but how does that actually benefit us? I mean, if we took the ratio to the extreme and said everybody who lives in Huntington Beach actually worked in Huntington Beach, would that be beneficial? And I would argue that it actually would not be beneficial for a lot of businesses because, well, if you live here, you eat at home, so you may actually drive business down. So I'm kind of wondering why that ratio, why it's important to increase that ratio. Help me understand.
It's not necessary to have it be, I guess the goal, let's say, isn't to have everybody that has a job in Huntington Beach work in Huntington Beach. It's more of trying to create more of a balance than 80%, 80%. So.
To the benefit of what? I mean, is there a benefit if that number is less?
Well, most of
50%.
the people that are commuting out of the city are high wage earners. So if they're high wage earners, then that means there's no potential for high wages in the city. We only have, well, we have about 50% lower wage jobs, let's say. So if we could capture some of that high wage, high industry jobs, not necessarily meaning that those people have to live here, but it is a benefit to the city because people are going to have more discretionary income to spend and potentially be able to buy and purchase a house in Huntington Beach.
And I mean, I would also add that it does also have the potential to reduce vehicle miles traveled, which is an environmental benefit as well, in terms, and a cost-saving benefit to ultimately consumers and drivers. So I mean, that is ultimately a traffic reduction. You may have more localized traffic, but you won't, what it does is it reduces the length of trip for that 85% commuting out of Huntington.
I understand. I mean, I guess if you really look at the second and third order effects of a decision like this, in the area, if everybody lived and worked in Huntington Beach, you gotta take it to the extreme. You wouldn't need dealerships up and down. People would need to buy a car, period. I mean, within reasons, right? So you really gotta think about whether or not driving some of these ratios does benefit the argument. I do agree with the jobs piece of it. I do understand, bringing in the higher wages, and I understand all that, so I guess it's really more.
It's a good point.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And let's take one more question and then we need to move on.
Is it safe to say that with the effort to streamline the general plan and strip as much out of it as we can and basically catch people at the zoning code, that by bringing in the research and technology category, you're providing more flexibility since it would be inclusive of the existing industrial area?
Yeah, I mean, it does provide a broader range of what could be put in, potentially go into these, and also capture stuff we don't know about yet, the businesses that are to come in the future. We'll talk about it when we get to the alternative, but one of the correspondences that we received from a property owner is within the Gothard corridor. And the property owner has owned the property, I want to say, for like 13 years or something, and wants to create this business idea that's not permitted in the industrial district, although it does sort of fit as within the industrial use, because it's talking about, it's kind of like a smaller nursery / demonstration of how to do, he was talking about succulents and drought-tolerant landscaping. It's almost like a landscaping store, but also providing demonstrations, etc., where that retail component isn't allowed in industrial. But it certainly would fit within, if you think about Gothard, that type of use fits within, the mix of what's on Gothard now. So those are the types of things, that could rectify where the property's just been sitting vacant for 13 years.
Okay, I'm just going to round out our discussion of land use designations then. As we move out of that industrial category, we would then have 4 categories of open space and recreation, conservation, park, recreation, and shore. 3 categories of public and community service, public, the community service, which is a new one that we talked about earlier, and then a specific identification of school as a land use type on the map. And then 2 designations related to specific plans. One is a base designation, as we discussed earlier, all of the existing adopted specific plans being identified as specific plan. And then use of a specific plan overlay for cases where we have land that's within an existing adopted specific plan, where we might be suggesting land use change at the general plan level. In other words, if the existing specific plan calls the site residential, and theoretically at least, we say, hey, let's change that site to industrial, we would pop that site out of the specific plan and call it industrial. It would then require an amendment to that underlying specific plan before that industrial designation, or that industrial development can take place. Basically, a regulatory structure to ensure the consistency in the long run of the documents one with another. Okay. Opportunity sites, on to the site-specific discussion. Anybody have any last lingering questions on the land use designations? Okay, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for additional discussion. As Jennifer indicated, we began this discussion at our last meeting in January with what we call the changing conditions map. There's still a version of that map in your packets, and it's been updated. On that map, there were sites identified as one of 4 things. Preserve, which is most of the city, and most of the city falls in this category where there is no change at all. The existing designation is the proposed designation. The existing land uses on the ground are pretty much what are going to be there in the future for the developed areas. The second was conserve. These are essentially your undeveloped areas where the priority is really to conserve them as open space. Again, no real proposed change. Designated for conservation now, will be so in the future. Then there were 2 categories of potential change that we discussed: enhance and transform. And when we presented this map to you last time, we showed that as enhance / transform, because we hadn't really formulated ideas or discussed ideas regarding how that transition or change could take place. One of the things that we've been able to do, working with staff, getting feedback from the project team as well as the entire planning department staff, is sort them into these 2 categories, enhance and transform. And in the enhanced sites, no land use change is proposed. But there are policies proposed to essentially execute the planned land uses in a more efficient, better way. In other words, we're not changing the land use map, but we may be changing the way that the land use map is implemented through policy. And we'll talk about some examples of that in a moment. That is applied to 5 intersections throughout the city. And then we have the 4 transform sites, areas where more significant change could occur with adoption of a new general plan. These are the 4 sites that are posted up on the wall and are forming the basis of most of our discussion this evening. So the new version of the change in conditions map is presented in your packets, and again, those sites are categorized 1 through 5 as enhanced sites and 6 through 9 as transformed sites. And we'll break them down individually. So again, just to reiterate the point, the 5 enhanced sites, no land use changes are envisioned. There could be modifications to the development pattern on those sites as they're redeveloped in the future. By doing things perhaps as simple as pulling the buildings from the back of the lot to the street, as an example. So these are the types of policy changes that are recommended for those 5 enhanced sites.
Did 2 drop out? 5 and 4 is 9. You had it right.
Yes, we actually did have 2 that dropped out.
Old World.
Old World Huntington, the Old World North Huntington Center was one that dropped out. The other is Holly Seacliff. So thank you for bringing that up. So then we have the 4 transformed sites where more substantive land use changes are envisioned. And a lot of this, part of this was the conversation with staff about the sort of real opportunities that could occur on these sites. Part of it is also some of the direction that we got from the city council to sort of streamline the process of considering these alternatives and really get down to changes that could reasonably occur in the time frame. So, the 5 enhanced opportunity sites, as shown on the map here and presented in your packets, these are centered on 5 intersections of arterial streets within the city: Beach Warner, Brookhurst Adams, 5 Points, Golden West Edinger, and Warner Golden West. So those are numbered 1 through 5 on the map. You'll recall having seen them on the previous version of the map as areas that were traced around the intersections applied to specific properties. For purposes of the general plan, we've now chosen to generalize these a little more as the properties that are essentially the commercially designated properties or mixed-use designated properties adjacent to these intersections. For these 5 sites, the proposal for the general plan is rather than changing land use designations, the general issue wasn't necessarily the land use that was proposed for the area. It was how the land use was executed and the physical form and design of the buildings that surround these intersections, which are key visibility points in your community. So there's a number of policy recommendations that have been put forward in your workbooks that would apply to all 5 of these locations. Ultimately, these are proposed as potential general plan policies, and if they're carried forward in the adopted general plan, would likely take the form of design guidelines applicable to these areas and or zoning designations or performance standards in your zoning code related to these areas. The first is to identify and remove existing curb cuts that don't meet safety requirements and develop new circulation patterns on affected sites. One of these that comes to mind most sort of relevant for that new circulation pattern is 5 Points and maintaining good pedestrian-oriented access to a property like the 5 Points area, which is predominantly designed for cars, but increasingly used by pedestrians. So that's the type of thing that first policy is at. Second is developing a city-defined landscape program to just generally improve the appearance of these intersections from both the pedestrian scale as well as the auto scale. Developing design guidelines for commercial developments, and this could be design guidelines unique to each of these areas, establishing a unique character for each of these areas, and ensuring that commercial development is proceeding in a manner that's consistent with that vision. Promoting additional complementary and supportive uses to kind of complete out some of these areas. Many of them function, some of them function as more regional intersections, particularly the ones along, say, Beach and Edinger. Others are more neighborhood-oriented, and ensuring that the types of uses provided for in those areas are really characterized to meet the needs of the surrounding neighborhood. And then, in general, improving pedestrian access across all of these sites. Each of them is identified as a potential location that's very challenging for pedestrian circulation, and one of the key focuses of this policy proposal is to improve pedestrian access in each of those locations. So again, in concept, the idea is for all 5 of those areas, the general plan doesn't really propose a potential change to land use designation. It's more a policy perspective oriented around these issues, which in many ways align with the mobility and access, Surf City community image, public safety, and economic vitality, as well as the redevelopment or revitalization orientations of the guiding principles. So that's a brief overview of the structure for these 5 enhanced locations. Any questions or comments on this?
Ed, let's take those and then Colin will take the question.
Yes, first I would like to recommend that we include the undergrounding of utilities as a policy for these 5 areas. And also, what I'd like to see is some type of intersection designation by visual. Not signage so much, but perhaps by pylons or something that would indicate that this particular area, and it is considerable when you consider these 5 large intersections, that this is a special area where we've got policies here to enhance these particular areas. I go back to one of the very first proposals on the beach edge corridor, whoever the consultant was, and they had some, what I thought were very good ideas of how to make it special looking. I'm not looking the right, hope you listen. So I'd like to recommend those 2 factors as policies.
Great, thank you, Ed. Clem?
I live near 5 Points, and I'm just curious, how would you improve the pedestrian access? Right now, Florida is all senior citizens. That whole area is pretty much senior citizens. I know those new apartments are going up, but it's mostly, like you said, it's mostly autos. I don't see I hardly ever see people walking around there. How would you increase that? How would you improve that? Curious.
Okay, so Jennifer, do you want to give maybe 2 examples and then we'll move on?
When we talked about 5 Points, it was mostly about the 5 Points Center. In terms of, when we say improving pedestrian access, it can count, we can mean that in 2 ways. One, across sites, actually properties, and one sort of across, within a property. And so when you're at 5 Points, there isn't a lot of room or a lot of area to walk across, say from Tilly's to get to Hashigo, let's say, which is on the other side, without, going across or then trying to get from the parking lot to one of these sites there's just really one sidewalk. So, for instance, at 5 Points, if the property owner were able to come in to make some improvements, if we had policies in the general plan and those these are guidelines, those are things that we can recommend to enhance the site for people that are going there, even if they are going in parking, let's say, to get around the site better and safer without, potentially getting hit by cars.
Great, thank you. And Tim, yes.
I've lived near the Golden West and Warner site for decades, and I've seen very little investment in the area. And I think it's safe to say that the centers near Brookhurst and Adams, I think the northeast corner was just redeveloped. But usually to get owners to invest in their shopping centers, to upgrade them, you need to give them an incentive. You need to give them an economic carrot. And we have, in my opinion, many owners in town whose centers have stratified, where the rents are not going up, the tenants are struggling, and there's really no incentive for the owners to invest in their properties because they're not going to get any increased rent because the demand for the uses at the center are limited, and as a result, there's no incentive to invest in it. And so I just want to point out that with these enhanced changes, there's really no incentive for for the owner to upgrade the center. And so you need a carrot.
Right, okay, so including incentives for property owners. And
May I follow up on that,
Yes,
please?
yes.
Because you mentioned Brookhurst and Adams. We worked with the city and the property owner for 10 years. It took 10 years for that property owner to upgrade that center on the northeast and the southeast corner of Brookhurst and Adams. And we need policies that will perhaps take only maybe 2 years from the time that it really needs to be upgraded until the time this actually happens, instead of waiting 10.
Great, so of course it is. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Roy.
Well, I'm curious, other than, how do you force somebody like that to, I mean, you know, I heard when Jennifer was talking about, you know, encouraging, you know, technology coming in, and anytime I hear the word encouraging, it reminds me of what Tim just said, there's a carrot is going to be money. So how does the city, well, through these policies, will the city have teeth in it so that we can say, just like Ed mentioned, you have 3 years to improve this property, or else, or what? That's my point. I just, because it's private property, I don't know how other than giving them financial, you know, and I know I've lived since '84, close to Golden West and Warner. And that is huge, the one that's on the northwest, and that's huge. I mean, you could build you could add all kinds of businesses just in the parking lot. I mean, it's so huge, but I don't know how you actually go about forcing them or encouraging them to improve it.
So I'm going to ask Jennifer to just describe briefly about teeth in general. You can incentivize reinvestment or investment in properties through land use in several ways. You can, through the general plan, you can change a land use, which allows for more flexibility. You can streamline land use, which, you know, shortens the process, all of which affect, let's say, a property owner's bottom line, right? Which can be an incentive. And then you can put policies in your general plan that would then later commit the city to do something more actionable, like dedicating or committing rehab funds to commercial properties in specific areas, right, to reinvest. So the general plan would go about it that way. So you do land use changes, which we're not really recommending a whole lot of change in land use. Or you could do that through policies, which then commit the city to doing something actionable, like using funding to have reinvestment in areas, commercial areas, let's say on the 5 enhanced areas, so that they have that incentive to upgrade the site, make a cohesive landscape area, maybe get some newer tenants and remodels.
Are you referring to like the city providing interest-free business loans? I mean,
Well, there's a lot of different tools, and the general plan doesn't get into that specific level. The general plan and what we're looking from the GPAC for are policies. So Tim and Ed talked about, well, let's put some policies in there for economic incentives. And then it's up to, you know, if the council, let's say, you know, supports that and improves those policies, you also then create some objectives and some implementation programs. That's when you start getting into what those tools actually are.
A lot of what this general plan does is establish a framework for change, when and if change occurs. So on one hand, it's a lot of these buildings in a 25-year general plan cycle now, many of these buildings are going to start hitting the end of their useful life, and they're going to be rebuilt, remodeled. Whole sites may be demolished and rebuilt in another form as these buildings start kind of timing out and ending their useful life. So a lot of these programs are about saying, when and if that occurs, here's the way the city would like for that development to occur in the future. It's commercial today, we want it to be commercial tomorrow. We may just want it to be commercial designed a little bit differently, or with a mix of uses that supports the neighborhood. It's about the city essentially setting the bar for what happens at these locations, when and if they change of their own accord. The other thing is thinking about the potential for these areas to continue to change again over the course of that 20 to 40 year period, and setting up frameworks for example, when the city does economic development strategies from time to time. If the general plan says policies in the general plan provide for the city to consider various different types of financial incentives to spur this type of redevelopment of these locations, as the city does an economic development strategy in, say, 2020, they can refer to that general plan policy and say, this is a priority area for us as we start to look at what the economic development strategy is for, say, the next 5 years. So again, this is an example of us saying, here's a 20-year framework, and the tools you've used to achieve them in the first 5 years might be very different from the tools you've used to achieve them in years 15 to 20. So I think just kind of always bringing that type of a perspective to these questions is really important.
Okay, so I'm going to move us on. If you have additional comments and questions, save them, because we will have time for additional questions after this.
So that was the enhanced onto the 4 transform sites. So that this gets a little deeper when we get into these 4 sites, and we will break each one of these down individually. There are 4 sites remaining that we're discussing as potential transformation sites. The first is the Gothard Street Industrial Corridor, the second, the Northwest Industrial Area, the third, Peters Landing, and the fourth, the Southeast Opportunity Area. We'll take each one and sort of break down some discussion of the existing conditions, discussion of the potential alternatives, and then provide a space after those presentations for individual discussion of each of the 4 areas. In the packets that you've received, each of these discussions is organized by first presenting and discussing what the existing general plan provides for. Then discussing what has been observed as some of the existing uses. Again, on that point from earlier about how what's on the left is essentially kind of what's on the books in terms of the general plan. What's on the right is what's on the ground in terms of what's built there today. And in many cases, they're the same. In others, they're different. One little example of that, for example, is at this intersection where in this map, these gray colors are industrial use and the red colors are commercial. And over here where the blue is all industrial. So for example, you've got some existing commercial use in an industrial land use designation. And that's going to occur. This was the vision 20 years ago for what to do with that corridor. This is the representation in 2014 of how far that's come. Okay, so that's always an important thing to keep in perspective going forward. So for the Gothard Street corridor, the majority of the area is designated for industrial use in the existing general plan. And for the most part, when you look over at the map on the right with the gray colors, which in this case represents industrial, for the most part it's developed that way, with a little bit of commercial development scattered throughout the area. 3 different land use alternatives are put forward for the Gothard Street Industrial Corridor. The first one on the left is, and this will be the case of all 4 of the alternatives that we discussed, when we talk about alternative A, and these will be labeled A, B, and C. When we talk about alternative A, it is in essence the existing general plan carried forward into the new land use classification system we described. In this case, there's no change. It was industrial in the existing general plan. It's industrial in alternative A, because we didn't make any change to that industrial designation. There are a small number of individual parcels that have been changed in that alternative just to represent existing uses that aren't going to change. But in this case, they're public and community service. There are things like a transfer station, a drainage corridor. What's the third one is there? It's an existing utility property. These are public properties that aren't going to change. So we basically dialed those in. And one of them is a church. This one is actually the Seabreeze Church. And so that's alternative A, which is in essence no change to the existing general plan other than dialing in those existing uses that are on the ground that are public or community service and not likely to change. Alternative B does a couple of things. One, it introduces potentially a mixed-use designation for areas north of Hale Avenue. That would match up if you were to look at the land use designations for the Edinger Avenue corridor, that would match up with the mixed-use designations along Edinger Avenue, which are actually specific plan, but these would be mixed-use designations within the Beach Edinger corridor specific plan for that location. What that does is in essence kind of builds on the potential for mixed use of the northern portion of the Gothic corridor. One of the things we heard as we started to discuss key issues with the GPAC, we had a lot of conversation about housing or no housing on the Gothic corridor. We're bringing you options with housing and options with no housing. And we want to understand the different perspectives that are present on the GPAC. The options with housing included in a mixed-use context. It would be north of Hale, which is consistent with some of the comments we heard about if housing were to occur on the Gothic corridor, it would be more appropriately placed at the northern end of the corridor. The other thing that this alternative B does is it introduces the research technology designation at a couple of locations around the Warner Avenue intersection, as well as a larger lot on the southern portion of the property, or southern portion of the area. So this designation is really characterized as introducing mixed-use commercial and housing to the northern portion, introducing research and technology around the Warner Avenue intersection, and on another series of properties at the bottom of the area, and then retaining industrial throughout the rest of it. So the real core of the area, the central portion of the area up against Central Park, would remain in its industrial character. The third alternative, rather than doing mixed use, would introduce research technology up at that northern area, north of Hale, continue it down the eastern edge of the Gothard corridor on the eastern frontage of Gothard to the bottom of the corridor, build it up again just south of Central Park on the west side, but retain this eastern area in its existing industrial designation. So what that does is it opens more of the corridor potentially to that employment technology designation. A couple of things to consider as you evaluate these alternatives is one of the other objectives potentially of that research technology designation is introducing it in a limited form in the city at identified sites where investment in technology infrastructure could occur and create enough demand to support potential higher tech industries to occur. And so in this alternative, that would be up and down the Gothic corridor. In this alternative, it would be more focused on the Warner Avenue intersection and a couple of others. Any general comments on the alternatives presented?
I got a question.
Before you launch into that, I just want to draw everyone's attention to this packet of papers I showed you. So there is a piece of paper for each of these opportunity sites. And you'll see that really this is what is framing the discussion for the next 15 minutes. So we're interested in knowing how does this alternative support the vision and guiding principles for you? And then also the second question is, are there missed opportunities with this alternative? We do want to hear from you now, but we're also recognizing that we have a limited time tonight and that not everyone will be able to say everything that they would like to say. So we're encouraging you to fill out these sheets for each site as well. Okay.
I have a question. Yeah, I do. Right now, the city encourages a lot of car repairs along Gotham. And if you're going to do the research, what's going to happen to car repairs? You're going to change the designation and kind of kick them out, or how would you handle that?
It would still be permitted under the RT.
Okay, so we're going to take two more questions, and then I really want to hear people's comments about each of these. So Diane and then...
Just real quick, on this corridor, it says it's going from Ellis to Edinger. Why did it not go Garfield to McFadden?
The land use designation on Gotham for those areas isn't industrial. That includes the entire industrial corridor.
John?
Okay, so it looks like in Plan B and Plan C, there's a piece of technology that jumps across on the east side. Is there already a pre-designated plot for that square plot of land, light pink, I guess? Yeah, exactly. And then the mixed use at the top, I guess I'm not 100% familiar, but isn't it already starting to go mixed use and construction started, they've shut down? But that was all rolling along.
Along Warner, where the research and technology goes east, that's just to capture the frontage off of Warner. And then the mixed-use area is just north of the mixed-use area on alternative B that you're talking about. So it's within the specific plan, the Beach Edinger specific plan. So it's right there on the west side. One other thing we want to point out as we're talking about this alternative and all of the alternatives is that they don't have to stay this way. The GPAC can mix and match. As the project team has discussed, the city planning team has discussed, they've morphed along the way, and we expect that would continue with the GPAC and as we move forward in the process.
So with that, let's start to hear your comments with perspective on each of these, and I'm going to start here and then go down the line. So, John.
And I guess this just follows along to my questions earlier, and also I think we dovetail along with Mr. Sternberg was saying. I'm having a hard time trying to see the difference between a research and technology land use and an industrial land use. It seems to me that they're almost identical. And what I'm concerned with is that depending on how we define or classify the research and technology land use, we can wind up shutting out businesses that are currently in that zone. So I guess my recommendation is one of two things. Either number one, we just get rid of the whole industrial classification altogether and call it research and technology and allow the kinds of industrial uses that we have in the city, number one. Or number two, we just ditch the commercial or ditch the research and technology land use and have that as one of the goals under a industrial land use. And also say that as one of our goals in the general plan, that we're encouraging the high-tech, the research-oriented businesses or the high-tech. But what I don't want to see happen is existing businesses get shut out of a particular area because now they no longer match that research and technology classification. Especially there's a lot of, for instance, the automotive garages, there's a lot of really nice, that's not exactly what we call high-tech business, but they're very nice businesses, they're very state-of-the-art, they're the kind of businesses that I don't want to see leave the city, leave that area.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Clara, I think your hand is up.
I like number C, actually. I don't mind having the one section of maybe the top of it, research and development, but I think if we're going to do that, we've got to do something like have a strong backbone internet, something that makes it really a reason for them to come, okay? And I'm definitely against we have more than enough apartments up there for them to walk if they want to work there or whatever, but I really think in order for the tech, yeah, I agree with him about the, I like keeping the order, but as far as the top, we could have one section, but it's gotta be, we've gotta do something really that people want to move there because, with the super speed internet, something that nobody else has, something really unique. So anyway, that's what
Regarding the infrastructure for the section. Okay, Leslie?
I agree as well with the C plan, and I'm just a little confused though, because the part that's right along Edinger is not part of this specific plan. Is that right?
Of this opportunity.
Yeah, I'm going to attempt to point it out here with the laser pointer. These properties that are immediately fronting on Edinger are not a part of this opportunity site. Correct me if I get this wrong, Jennifer, but they are a part of the Beach and Edinger corridor specifically.
Yes, and what John was pointing out when he was saying, isn't that already mixed use, is the southwest corner that Jeff has the pointer on.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan, yes.
Yeah, I think that alternative C looks good. Down towards just south of the sports complex, though, that's the transfer station. That's now it's currently zoned fund south. I don't know specifically what we're using it for, but the gun range is in there too, I'm guessing, right? Or is the gun range just out of this?
Where is the gun range? The gun range is in Central Park, it's very, very close, just down a little bit. Right there.
So it's just on the left, it's just outside of this.
Yeah, so the transfer station, and when the project team and the city staff talked about that, we recognized that there is, it's a county-owned site. The county has selected, did an RFP, did select a quote-unquote developer, but it's really a user, a long-term lease for the site. I think it's supposed to be a commercial recreation facility, like a paintball facility. And so that type of use currently could be something that is permitted with like a conditional use permit in this type of zone. So it doesn't preclude that from happening.
And then so just, because the research and technology is basically just mixed use, but commercial, industrial mixed use instead of residential commercial, correct?
Yeah, it is, but I think it's really going to be more also in how we characterize it in the write-up.
Sure.
And that's also where we want the feedback from GPAC too.
And so in the train tracks, the current rail corridor runs just at the top portion, it's on the east side of or the right side of the purple at the top, for context?
Yes, so actually, the rail corridor in alternative C is what splits the industrial and the RT designation. So east of the rail corridor, that's still industrial, and then west of the rail corridor to Gofford, along Gofford is the RT in that, right. And then it ends at the former lumber site, which is right at the bottom of that.
So I'm just trying to get context for what we're talking about here. So that this will allow some of the breweries, for instance, to open a restaurant instead of just having a tasting room.
Yes, and actually we talked a lot about that, the microbreweries that we have coming in, and some of those sort of creative uses where our current designations don't allow that to happen unless you go through a very burdensome process to get there.
Those are those are reasonable jobs at that point. I mean, in tangent to that, you talked about converting some of this industrial commercial is creating, we're trying to figure out how that's going to create engineering jobs by eliminating some of our industrial use. I mean, I'm assuming we're trying to carve out a small section of the industrial to have maybe a couple of things in the industrial use, or because I don't want to turn it into the lab, for instance. I mean, granted, the lab's cool, but if we're going to keep an industrial corridor for that, I think those are some interesting jobs we're going to lose for retail jobs.
Well, I think the market is probably going to dictate a lot of that commercial in the research and technology and industrial areas.
And I think that type of information will be more likely in the northwest area than it is along Gofford, just because of the scale of the property. So I mean, while the employment technology certainly, or research technology certainly allows for that use to occur, I think the dynamics of that use may be better suited to the Northwest area than the Gothard area for a project that would be of the scale of the lab.
When we were talking about the Gothard corridor, we were talking of going back to the conversations that I know we had with here at the GPAC where, they were talking about the incubator businesses. I think Clem brought up earlier before the meeting started that there's a lot of smaller businesses that are getting into these emerging technologies and some of these newer types of industries, but they're smaller. So I guess when we were looking at the Gothard, the research and technology was to try to keep them here and allow them to grow and expand and create some pockets for maybe where policies could go and where you get some sort of demonstration projects where you have the infrastructure, maybe commitments, do some of that cool stuff.
So we have a couple more minutes to discuss this transformation site, so let's take a couple more comments.
Okay, real quick. I think the makerspace concept would be good along this corridor as well. So I think that would be an opportunity that we could look at. And adjacent to some of the commercial areas, that would be sort of a cool thing. So you could have this demonstration or educational opportunities there. Definitely broadband, fiber, anything as an incentive to create that research and technology. And when somebody's looking up, where can I go, they may not realize that they could be industrial. So I think calling it research and technology, it may just be a small sales aspect that's important for people to understand that. So I like definitely option C. Thanks.
Option C, obviously, you can even draw a big fence just below the mixed use there, so there's no incursion. And also, you might consider a visual element of the research and development section.
Yeah, get into that comment you had earlier, yes.
Alternative C.
Alternative C, okay.
I think alternative B, actually, because I've been in some projects, in particular one up in Ventura, I recall, where it was an artist colony and a musician's colony, where these people work ridiculous hours. I mean, they'll get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then they're working on something. And sometimes the art pieces or the sculpture takes up a lot of volume, which is tough to do in a typical apartment. So something that's kind of opening up an opportunity for somebody that's in the technology field, a live-work situation, not the traditional live-work situations that we typically see, which are really just apartments, but it's more, I don't want to call it manufacturing space, but technology space, artist space. I mean, the one project I saw in Ventura, they were, regularly, monthly, they had shows on where people would come and see the art and the musicians would perform, and they need non-traditional living space. So I personally like B.
And I just want to remind everybody that we aren't voting, so. And let's take one more comment and then we move on.
Okay, I mean, with the research and technology designation, one thing that I would caution people is to, I'll give it a real-life example of what happened to my dentist in the city of Lake Forest. He was in Mission Viejo and wanted to go to Lake Forest. They had the research and technology designation, and he wasn't allowed to go there until he had to figure out a way to get research and technology, so they had to make the crowns in-house instead of, having them outsourced. So that way they got around it, but you may be restricting certain types of businesses with that kind of designation. I just wanted to let you know that, it is somewhat restrictive.
So exploring that definition. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next transport site. And then after this, we're going to take a 5-minute break, just so everyone can get a little fresh air, stretch your legs, and then we'll break.
Thank you, Andy. All right, just switching over then to the Northwest Industrial Area. So this is essentially the area by its name, located in the northwest portion of the city. A lot of it, so this is essentially west of Springdale, north of Edinburgh, east of Bolsa Chica, and south of Rancho and Spa generally. The existing general plan designates the majority of this area for industrial use. And within that, would have a maximum development intensity of 0.75 FAR. There are 12 parcels located on the eastern edge of Bolsa Avenue within the area, 12 parcels that are currently designated for office use. And that would be represented then again in alternative A. And as we look at the existing uses, again, this is an area that is largely already developed as industrial use with the existing office uses at this location and a smattering of other individual office uses throughout the rest of the area, as well as some supporting retail uses on individual properties. This is the area, so north of Bolsa is the specific plan area where the Boeing property currently is, and no changes proposed in any way to any of that property as part of the alternatives. All of the proposed changes would occur south of Bolsa Avenue. So on this one, there are again 3 alternatives proposed. Alternative A would essentially carry forward the existing general plan, with most of the area designated for industrial use as shown in the purple, and the 12 properties that were designated for office use before would continue to be designated specifically for office use. One thing I should point out about that designation is typically an office designation in a general plan context is a fairly limiting designation. It is essentially saying we encourage office and pretty much only office use at these locations. And so one of the things that, with regard to that property, or those 12 properties, in the 2 alternatives, we substitute either the industrial or the research technology for that office use, again, to open up a broader range of uses for those properties as they might transition over time in the future. Alternative B, the concept behind alternative B is in essence to provide a bit of a buffer area between the industrial area and surrounding residential properties and or the school property to the south with the research and technology designation. Essentially, this buffer around the outside would provide for the range of uses that might occur in research and technology, which generally are characterized as lighter scale industrial, and potentially really focused more on kind of clean industry and tech industry that wouldn't be as oriented potentially toward manufacturing as the traditional industrial. Again, to provide that bit of buffer against the surrounding residential areas. The area at the western edge of Bolsa is highlighted in both of these alternatives as research and technology, again, to provide more of a cluster of those uses to support synergy between the individual properties that might develop with that use, again, to kind of create that innovation center type concept. The center of the alternatives, B and C, is retained. This is, I believe, the Quicksilver factory. That property and a lot of the adjacent areas are retained for industrial use, the more heavy manufacturing-oriented industrial use. And the key difference between alternative B and C is simply the size of the research technology area. Alternative C is a bit more elaborate in terms of the application of that research and technology designation to a larger area, still retains the industrial properties at and surrounding the Quicksilver site, as well as the rows of industrial properties immediately to the west. Alternative B would retain a larger portion of the properties south of McFadden in the industrial designation as opposed to the research technology. And again, as we've been discussing, the key differences between research and technology and industrial are that there is a difference in FAR, in the sense that you're allowed a bit higher FAR in the research and technology designation than in the industrial. But you're also encouraged to pursue a wider range of potential industrial uses with potential investment in information technology to support those. With a real emphasis again on cleaner, manufacturing uses would be allowed in the RT, but they're more of a cleaner, lighter character than some of the more heavy manufacturing that you would typically find in the industry.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So we're going to go ahead and take some comments and questions now, and I just want to remind everybody that the next sheet that's in front of you is your comment card for this transform site. So please do record your comments there as well as expressing them now. Yes, John.
So on both these, with the technology designation, you know, you have up in the air or jump in the air, whatever the hell that thing is, entertainment. How does that preclude other types of industry like that coming in where you're using warehousing for entertainment, whether it's, you know, whatever? And does it prevent those kinds of businesses from coming in? And then it's a curiosity question, you know, you have a number of food locations that support that industrial area. How does, like my place and a couple of others, how does that change their ability to open up businesses? I'm just curious how the designation makes it difficult for those businesses to come in.
Jeff, do you want to take that?
I mean, I'll answer your second question first, which is about the commercial uses that would be either in the RT or the I. Supporting commercial uses, things like a sandwich shop or a simple, smaller retail outlet kind of thing, would be allowed in either the industrial or the RT. They're allowed in the industrial now, and would continue to be so, provided that those are commercial uses intended primarily to support the industrial use. So, you know, lunch shops for employees in the industrial area. The difference with the RT would be the difference with RT and commercial is within the RT, you could have a commercial use that is intended to be a commercial use, not necessarily related to the surrounding industrial area. But that commercial use needs to have, needs to build on the character of the area and the theme that's trying to be established. One of the potential advantages of going with some of those sort of types of industrial or types of commercial scale, the camps, the MIC, those types of places, is at a location like this, it could provide a nighttime activity and use of the infrastructure around the clock in cases where some of the industrial areas, if they're not operating on multiple shifts, essentially shut down in the evening. Obviously, that needs to be mitigated and managed in terms of traffic, noise, and other impacts. But that's the other intent, is to create more of a 24-hour use of some of these areas to take advantage of the infrastructure investments made. To your first question, actually, could you remind me of your first question?
You know, there's up in here, I think it's called, or whatever, it's a entertainment for children of sorts, and more of those kind of businesses are coming around. And
Like the trampoline.
Like trampoline houses, bounce houses, gyms.
And there's a number of those coming in where it's mazes or evening, and they move into large industrial areas like that. So how would that designation prevent those kind of businesses from utilizing those industrial locations?
Right now in industrial, those are, they're permitted, I think, with a conditional use permit. They're all designated as commercial recreation. If you go to planning commission and get a conditional use permit. The way we would address that would be through the zoning. So, as we had talked about earlier, if this land use designation, this new land use designation is created and adopted for areas of the city, the next part of that, before we start implementing it, is to create zoning for it. And it's at that level where we determine what specific uses, we get more specific in the types of uses that are permitted. Right, whether it's permitted by right, whether it requires a conditional use permit, whether it requires a conditional use permit and lot size restrictions, etc. One of the things that we anticipate hearing with the GPAC and then as we move forward is, is this a type of use that we want to see still be permitted with the CUP, or do we want to make it less restrictive or more restrictive for these types of uses to come into this area? And we have that ability to craft that here.
So Dan and then John.
So Playa del Rey is, Playa Vista is eating up all sorts of awesome business that potentially should have on Huntington Beach. How are they zoning or how are they facilitating outside of financial ways? Are they bringing those companies in? Is it through this type of zoning, or are they got something more creative or less creative?
So how can we bring in the businesses that kind of just run us through this general plan?
I think they've done some different strategies and they've used some economic development tools. I don't know exactly what those are. We don't know, does anybody, I think, is anybody on the GPAC? Tim?
They are redeveloping office buildings up in Valle Vista that are not all 5-10 years old, and they're redoing them. Because Steve Jobs was one of the first guys that came up with the idea that they're in a creative business, and a lot of their best ideas happen when people bump into one another at the vending machine, getting coffee, getting lunch, going up the elevator, and then they sit down a while, and they have these ideas that turn into new products, new services. And so they're redeveloping their office buildings to create more meeting spaces, more couches where they can lounge around, have coffee, and talk, and have conversations. I don't know if it is a zone change or a zoning or a general plan amendment. It's just that they're physically reconfiguring how the buildings are built on the inside and in the outside too, the common areas.
The building complexes as well is the bigger thing, and they, for better or worse, have high-density residential right around them as well. And so you're getting this very good, high-quality, very high-paying jobs living in this development that was there prior to this. And just to make sure that as we go through this process, that we're not precluding somebody from that coming in and building a campus, because it looks like there's a lot of those smaller parcels up there that the zoning, that the general plan isn't going to preclude kind of consolidation to put a Facebook complex in down here, or another surf company, or Boeing decides that we're no longer viable for them. That we have those tools without having to. We make it we reduce the friction for a company to come in and say, yes, we can absolutely go ahead and do this, as opposed to having to go through a full zoning text amendment, a general plan update. 6 years later, they've moved on somewhere else. So.
Okay, so providing the opportunity. John?
I noticed that under alternatives B and C, we've now, I guess, ditched the office designation here. So my question is, are we going to lose the ability in these two alternatives to allow office usage, especially in some of these strategic intersections like Springdale and Bolsa, or for instance, Bolsa Chica and Bolsa? Suppose we have a company that wants to come in and move either their corporate headquarters or their regional headquarters in here, and would they be precluded from doing that, given alternative B and C?
No, office would be an allowed use in both the I and the RT. So actually, you could do an office anywhere south of Bolsa under these designations. The real key, again, as I said, that with an office designation is usually that you're restricting that use to only office, and you can't do industrial on this property. So this is kind of taking the whole thing the other way and saying office is a permitted use throughout the entire area.
More thoughts? Yes, Leslie.
Talking about, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
A question on B and C. Are we saying that it's going to be okay to put a bar in right across the street from those houses, so that, open till 2 a.m.?
Okay, so, yes. So the question is, are we saying that we would be able to put a bar in across from those residential housing?
I think we need to back out the level of detail the general plan gets to. It would allow for some eating and drinking establishments, restaurants, some commercial, some entertainment. But when you start to talk about, a bar that's open till 2 a.m., that's when you get into like the zoning level. So when we write the zoning code, first of all, I guess that type of use pretty much anywhere in the city requires a conditional use permit from the planning commission. So those are the types of considerations we would, I guess, account for in the zoning, writing up the zoning. But there is potential for restaurants, and potentially commercial entertainment type of uses by having the designation.
Okay, any more questions or comments before we take a 5-minute break here? Okay, great. So it is 8:25, so we'll be back here at 8:30. And I do want to recognize that we are behind schedule and apologize, but we just have so much to cover. So we'll jump right back in 5 minutes. Two more
Okay, the next one is Peters Landing. So now we've moved all the way over to the western edge of the city, just north of Huntington Harbor and just east of Sunset Beach. So this site is designated commercial visitor in the existing general plan. I should also point out this site is located within the coastal zone, which introduces a whole additional set of considerations with regard to the range of uses that are provided for the site. Part of that is embodied in the designation of commercial visitor, which implies that these are sites that provide retail options both for local residents as well as visitors to the coastal zone from throughout California. And that's going to be an important consideration moving forward as we consider the alternatives, because one of the requirements of the California Coastal Act is that the city provide a range of commercial uses within the coastal zone suitable for meeting visitor needs. So that's an important consideration for these sites that are inside of the coastal zone. The existing general plan is then a commercial visitor designation with a maximum development intensity of 0.5 FAR. And it's also subject to a design overlay, indicating that the city has purview through design guidelines and design review processes over development that might occur in that area. As you move to the diagram to the right, the existing land uses, again within that black line, are all commercial oriented. And here we're along Pacific Coast Highway. So these are essentially the properties located east of Pacific Coast Highway around Anderson Street. And again, those residential properties you see sort of to the south and the east is the northern edge of Huntington Harbor. There are, as with the others, 3 alternatives proposed for this site. Alternative A is a continuation of the existing general plan with visitor commercial uses. Again, commercial uses intended primarily for visitor serving purposes. This alternative B continues that same use designation. So again, commercial serving visitor uses, but would raise the FAR of that site from 0.5 to, I believe it's 1.5 under this alternative. And Jennifer, correct me if I get this slightly off, but my understanding is the zoning for this site today would be at a 1.5 FAR as it exists.
That's correct.
So under the this is one of those cases where the existing general plan is inconsistent with the zoning, because the general plan limits this to a 0.5 FAR, but the zoning would allow the property owner to go to 1.5. Alternative B rectifies that situation and aligns the general plan with the zoning. This is a location where the market trends report identifies Peters Landing as kind of a lost opportunity within the community in terms of a coastal site that could accommodate additional development that could in turn lead to some increased tax revenues and provide a wider range of visitor serving uses to help the city comply with local coastal act requirements. This is also a site where there has been some expressed property owner interest in exploring development opportunities in the future. Any discussion of this site must acknowledge its adjacency to the Sunset Beach community and ensure that the community has an opportunity to weigh in on potential options, both at the general plan scale and later in the development process. for any property that would be developed. Alternative C would, rather than go with visitor serving commercial, go with a mixed use designation, with the intention that this mixed use be horizontal as opposed to vertical, primarily. And that's probably going to be the case given the orientation of these properties and the size and configuration of the properties, as well as their adjacency to Sunset Beach and Huntington Harbor, to ensure that you're not necessarily looking at high-rise development mixed use on the site, but rather looking at maybe a forward use of the ground area of the site with a horizontal mixed use, perhaps the subterranean parking or another parking alternative. So that's ultimately the alternative C designation. So that would introduce both residential and commercial uses, and within that mixed use context, an alternative C, what's a little different about this mixed use is that it would likely also carry a heavier emphasis on visitor serving commercial, again, to support the objectives of the Coastal Act. So while it would encourage retail and housing, that retail might be more oriented toward beach use and water area use consistent with the Coastal Act. This could also open the potential for another lodging facility at the location. That would be consistent also with the mixed use designation or with the visitor serving designation.
Okay, great, thank you, Jeff. So let's take comments and questions, and I also want to remind people about your comment card, but Hayden reminded me that we'd love your name on each of these, so if you do write on them, please have something to put that it was you, so we know you had which comment. So Dan first, and then John.
So would this be appropriate for possibly a specific plan use as opposed to mixed use, to give us more granular control of it, so that, because being in the coastal zone, Newport Beach put in a public marina in a certain area, there's dedication for better coastal access here. I know it's next to it, but it's medium high density to the right, and
Residential medium 15.
Okay. And then, yeah, because this is a failed center. I mean, this has been the same way that I've been alive for 32 years, and it's never been successful. There's never like, hey, let's go to Peter's Landing and do something. And I think this gives us a great opportunity. It sounds like
Did you miss the weather?
It was right, it was there in the stroller.
He's only 32.
Yeah, so I think that potentially, I don't know if we're trying to eliminate specific plan and bring everything in line with the general plan, but I definitely think that a mixed use is going to be, I think, completely appropriate for this, and PCH, being the Caltrans corridor, figuring out what they want for, because it's real crazy over there, it's 2 lanes, but you can take it as 3, and I get passed on the right all the time, and, I think parking's definitely going to be a concern there, so to make sure that we can kind of build it in a way that has public serving use, because we're going to probably add more visitor trips so that we're not over-densifying that area, and also at the same time making it somewhat successful for both the property owner and the city.
So if I could frame your suggestion in kind of policy terms, what might work there would be a version of alternative C with a specific plan over requiring preparation of a specific plan for the entirety of the area prior to development.
Yes, I would say that's most likely, that would be, I think, the best granular control that but Sunset Beach would want, I think, the rest of the people for that corridor.
The EIR, when it's the same plan?
It's super complicated. It's a very complicated project, so you may want to look at all the environment. You may want to look at all the environmental specifically.
Adding more granular level, as you said.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
And I too particularly missed the red onion, especially when I was single. This is one that I struggle with the most because I can see the advantages, but there's also disadvantages of a hotel. And number one, has anybody even, approached the city about building a hotel on that? And I'd like to hear from this group, what they feel are the pros and cons of a hotel. And the kind of hotel I think would have to be a smaller scale hotel, not like a resort or anything like that.
Well, aren't there already like 4 inns right there? And then there's the, what is it, a Best Western or something? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at the
packet that we sent from the correspondence from the property owners. One of those includes, so the Peters Landing site, by the way, includes Peters Landing and the Donna Beachcomber site. Just wanted to make sure, we refer to it as Peters Landing, but it doesn't encompass those two areas. The Donna Beachcomber property owner did include in their narrative or request to be considered an idea for a hotel. And I think they want to go with 8 stories, which won't
It says
happen.
80 feet.
Right, which is not going to happen. So they are looking at, or maybe they've been approached by builders to do some sort of, or investors to do a hotel. So we don't, that's just one consideration, but I guess that is what they're looking at.
Perhaps a boutique hotel going in there, but not any kind of a large-scale hotel. Like I say, certainly not a resort hotel.
My comment would be, any development really depends upon an EIR and then the traffic impact, because that's the main thing.
The specific plan will take care of that.
Other comments, questions regarding this?
I guess I'm trying to still figure out what the benefits would be to switch, like, I guess I'm not fully understanding, other than lodging, what's the difference between mixed use and, I just keep calling it VC because I keep forgetting what it stands for, but.
Is it a commercial?
Yeah.
Residential, so the mixed use would allow a visitor serving commercial plus a residential component, I think 25 units to be correct.
Okay, so that's really the only difference then. Okay.
Yeah, it is pretty much the only difference, but it's just the key difference.
Yeah.
In this case. Are there any other thoughts on the alternatives that you want to make sure we get? John?
So I know a lot of people talk about a hotel, but as was mentioned, in the last 30, 40 years going down there, the reason you don't have it is the only thing supporting that area are the residents. And of course, residents would have to have a vote as to what goes in there, but you turn it into something that's more touristy, which would then drive the smaller businesses. You almost need an anchor hotel, if you want to call it that, or a small resort, obviously a large resort wouldn't fit in there. And the residents would have to have a vote because it would affect them, but that's the only way you're really going to drive the economics of that area, because it is what it is. It's supported by the current residents that live around there. That's about it. So we have to either encourage it or shut it down.
Thank you, John.
Just a clarifying question. I don't believe the resident of Peters Landing was not in Sunset Beach. It's always been in Huntington Beach, the city limits. So I'm not sure if residents of Sunset Beach would need to vote on whether a hotel should go in there.
Well, you got people behind it, the harbor, there's residents behind it in Huntington Beach, and then you're right, you have the Sunset, which is now Huntington Beach, by the way. So they're all Huntington Beach residents now.
Jeff, do you want to clarify the residents?
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify terms, I mean, it wouldn't be a vote, but it would be I think what the city's intent would be with this area in terms of policy in the general plan would be to establish, particularly if there were a specific plan requirement, to make it very clear at the general plan level that the surrounding community must be engaged as a part of that planning process. And that it be designed in a way to encourage a lot of feedback early on. And I think that's just an acknowledgement of the sensitivity of this area. And that doing any type of development in this area, I mean, you are looking at a site that involves Caltrans, that involves the coastal commission, that involves the city. I mean, it's a complex process to do anything on this parcel.
When I use the word vote, I mean, their considerations, because as we've heard a lot of comments, but people don't want something forced down their throat, so in cooperation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so.
Okay, let's move on to the next transform site. So, pass back to Jeff.
Now we're going all the way down to each of the other end, the south of this opportunity area. These are properties you may know more formally as the power plant, the tank farm, and the asphalt site. So we've essentially kind of taken those, grouped them together into a single consideration opportunity area. The existing general plan includes industrial uses on the northeast portion, residential medium with a 15 unit per acre maximum that is contained within a specific plan, an existing specific plan, on the Ascon site, and then the remainder of the power plant is in public designation as well as the tank pump. There is essentially a drainage area, a creek that runs through the middle of the property. There is also an opportunity for an open space buffer along Magnolia on the eastern edge of the property. So these are some of the existing characteristics. This site is also at least partially, if not fully, within the coastal zone, and is adjacent to the beach and Pacific Coast Highway on the south, as well as the Huntington Beach wetlands to the southeast. So this is just for area context. Existing uses on the ground are largely what we've discussed. Some existing storage, self-storage type uses and industrial uses to the northwest. The Ascon site, which is on the northeast side, which is currently undergoing environmental remediation, the tank farm site, and the power plant.
Where's the proposed Poseidon plant?
Yeah, it's that.
So that is designated public, will remain designated public with regard to that site. So no change proposed for that specific site. So alternative A retains much of the existing uses with the introduction of one key difference, which is an open space conservation designation that will run along the existing creek channel and the property immediately to the east of it at this location, and an open space park designation that would run along the eastern side of the property against Magnolia, essentially connecting this park and school site down to the wetlands. So those are introduced in addition to the existing medium-density residential, public, and industrial designations in the site. The two alternatives proposed for this are essentially transitions of the area either to research technology under alternative B or to medium-density residential under alternative C. This is one of the cases where we want to ensure also to say that this is one of those that can be a mix and match. It doesn't have to all be RD. It doesn't have to all be residential. One of the things that we are introducing potentially as a context for this area has to do with the Ascon site. And you'll see that what we've done is we've labeled this RT-TDR or MR-TDR. TDR refers to a concept known as transfer of development rights. This is something that planners often use in cases where you have sites with constraints that may have development rights on them, but are constrained for one purpose or another. Could be sites where you've got the opportunity to provide additional habitat area, additional floodplain area. In this case, a site where you have potential environmental remediation concerns and the potential for providing for additional open space and or habitat area. How a TDR works is in essence that the development rights of an individual property, after the city establishes a legal framework for it, usually by adopting an ordinance enabling it, development capacity from one site may be passed to another in exchange for conservation of a resource or hazard area on the other site. So it allows the development potential to be transferred from one property to another. So for example, on this property, you can take either building intensity or residential density, remove it from this property. Let's say this is designated as residential 15. You could have a lower number of units or no units on that site if you transfer those development rights to another property, where you would then in effect increase the density of that property in exchange for protecting the other property for the common purpose. It's all regulated typically through an ordinance process of the city. You allow for the transfer of the development rights from one property to the other and create resources for conservation of the other concepts. how this is proposed within this alternative, the primary reason this is proposed within this alternative has to do with the actual potential to use the Ascon site for residential in the future. And it protects options in the event that the site cannot be remediated to the point that it could support residential development. And it opens the ability to use that site and essentially to keep the city's options and the property owner's options open. If there is the ability to clean that site up to a point where it can be used for residential, it can be used for residential. If in the event it can't, that site, the development intensity or the density allowed on that site could be transferred to the other two sites, the one to the west and or the one to the south, opening up this site potentially for conservation purposes, to allow for either additional parkland and the ability to essentially take that land and convert it into park use, or a lower intensity type of development that isn't residential, because usually the primary concern with some of these contaminated lands is the ability to use that land for residential purposes primarily. So it could open up more limited industrial and commercial use to that land, or its use in a conservation or park-oriented structure. So that's that concept of TDR, which would be applied only to the properties corresponding to the Ascon site. And again, primarily to keep the options open in the event the site cannot be remediated for residential use. So just to bring us back again to the alternatives, what that TDR would allow you to do is in this alternative would be to take building intensity associated with the RT designation and transfer it either down to the tank farm or west to the industrial properties. In this case, it would be taking the residential potential of these areas, which is at 15 units per acre, and transferring them either to the properties to the west and or to the properties to the south on the tank, which would push up the effective density of these properties by transferring this additional area, if they want to. So again, it provides options, not requirements. And this is potentially tricky. We're talking about multiple property owners that would have to enter into agreements, and the city would be party to these agreements. But the intent is ultimately to keep the options open for future use of the Ascon site, recognizing its potential to be restored.
Okay, thank you, Brett. So let's take comments and questions now. So I'm going to go around this way.
Okay, so let me, if I understand this correctly, you're proposing residential use of toxic waste dump. Have we not heard of Glove Canal? I mean,
The alternative is
well,
allowed on the
there's just a
general.
chance to change it, to get conservation of something else.
The Ascon site is currently designated for residential. It has a specific plan actually on it right now.
Exactly, but this is our chance to change it so that we...
Right, and the TDR option allows that while maintaining the development rights that the property currently has.
And that's a good clarifying point that I maybe didn't make when describing the TDR. One of the purposes of this TDR is there are vested development rights here. Whether that could actually happen or not, there are rights to develop that property into residential. What the TDR does is it retains those rights, but the way that this develops in the event that you can't remediate that site sufficiently to support residential is that you're showing the development right to do residential, so what might occur there is rather conservation. But in exchange for that conservation, you're transferring that development right. Instead of building the units there, you're building it on the adjacent properties. So
Do they have development rights on the adjacent properties now?
the adjacent properties are owned by, my understanding is owned by different owners. So there would have to be some transaction.
One of the other things to point out about this opportunity area is we got property owner correspondence for the tank farm site. And by way of background, the tank farm site received a coastal development permit to demolish the existing above-ground tanks on the property. And so that assumes that there would potentially be another use in the future of that site. And the property owners, representatives for the site have asked to be considered for residential uses, and that's in your packet as well, which is alternative C. John?
So if the TDR couldn't be applied, we'll say it can't be remediated, they tried to do the TDR to the southern property or the western, and I'm assuming the northern property, the southern property got the same problem, and it can't go there, does that make the west property, if it's available there, even higher density? In other words, it all gets crammed into the upper left-hand corner because you really can't move the TDR south, you can only move the west, and I'm assuming you can move the west, you probably can't move the west, but what happens if you can't move it? Does the TDR die?
The TDR option is only on ASCON, so if ASCON chooses not to exercise the TDR option, or it doesn't work out an agreement with the south, the tank farm property, we'll call it, or the west, the industrial properties, then it doesn't ever occur. And those properties develop independently with their, whether, or don't, with their designation of either RT as alternative B, or RM as alternative C, or the continuation of the existing designation. Who's going to hear that? Yeah, really.
So you have to make that designation, you have to make that designation right now. In other words, you have to put that tag on that TDR. I mean, because can you do it later on, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road?
So they're not even a guess, but definitely.
Absolutely, and this is a policy choice, could be made now, could be made later, could be made never. I guess the point I really want to make about this TDR is this is our intent to retain the development rights that exist. To ensure that through land use change, we're not inadvertently taking development rights off that site that exists today. And the TDR allows us to preserve those rights and for the cleanup process to move forward. And then at the end of the day, once the cleanup is done, if that site is remediated to a point that it can support residential, they have the option to build residential consistent with their development rights. If it is not, they still retain those rights and now have something that they can essentially trade, barter, trade, sell, right?
What's the timeline on that, if it's on with the ASCON?
Well, we actually, one of our GPAC members is very familiar with the ASCON site, so we'll ask him to give us a little bit of an update.
Okay. First of all, just for purposes of disclosure, I'm here representing the Public Works Commission. But in my day job, I'm branch chief of the California Department of Toxic Substances Control. So I'm going to be the person who will be signing the final remedial action plan for the ASCON site. In fact, right now, we're anticipating that being completed next month. We're wrapping up the process. It's been through public review and comment twice. We've done an EIR on it, in fact, actually 2 EIRs on it, and we're just finishing up our responses to comments on that. What the final remedy will entail is, first of all, removing remaining, what you want to call high-level or high-threat waste, particularly the styrene pit, as well as some of your remaining viscous or mobile waste that's out there. And what's going to be left is primarily low-threat, low-level waste that would then be consolidated, and then a cap, an engineered cap would be constructed over that waste, over that remaining waste material. It would include things like membrane as well as impermeable soils, and then it would be covered by an engineered cap. And then the final act that will be done is that because this cap will not be compatible with certain land uses, DTSC will then sign a land use covenant with the owners of the ASCON property. The owners are also the responsible parties, all the oil companies that want to have disposed waste there. And so they will be precluded from developing the property into housing, hospitals, daycare centers, and schools. Those would not be allowed under the land use covenant. However, all other land uses could be allowed, but first of all, DTSC would have to review those proposals to ensure that they don't present a problem as far as problem with the cap. In other words, they wouldn't cause the cap to fail and then the public getting exposed to waste. So more than likely, what it means is that a heavy industrial land use, like another power plant or a refinery or what have you, probably is not going to be allowed simply because it would be compatible with the cap. Likewise, an office building, a large high-rise office building wouldn't be allowed. You'd have those kinds of problems. But other kinds of land uses could be allowed. And again, that would be something, once the remedy is complete, then the owners would go to the city with whatever proposal they're going to have on that. And so beyond that, I would say, I encourage everybody to look seriously at all the land uses under all the scenarios, as well as this TDR complex. By the way, the cleanup, I think the timeline, we're looking at about 2 to 3 years when we have the final cap in place. There's going to be quite a bit of work going on.
Can I ask him a question?
Sure.
So the possible land uses that you mentioned, can you give us like an example of what that could be?
Very generally, you could probably, I could see certainly light industrial land use, or perhaps some of the research and technology use. You might be able to put commercial land use in there. Again, it's going to depend on how it's all designed. Open space is also a possibility, or even a recreational scenario. We do have sites in Southern California that were constructed over what used to be hazardous waste
A
sites.
baseball field, something like that can be there.
You could-
Cemetery.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, for that. Dan, yes. I'm sorry, Ed and then Dan.
Yes, thank you. On the AES plan, what is its expected lifespan?
The AES.
Their tenant work program right now is to start in 2 years, and it's like a 6-year project to demo and rebuild in 2 phases.
And the lifespan of that new structure,
That we'd have to get back to you.
of it maybe 40 years? Or
Oh, at least 40.
At least 40 years,
Sure.
okay. Well, to be very frank, what I would like to see, obviously, is it not be constructed, and I'd like to see, if possible, that we could extend a visit to certain commercial, like hotels, to this particular area. And I don't know what the lifespan of the adjoining mobile home park is, but a consideration in the perhaps decades from now, but with a short commercial at that hotel.
So, the word taking never got thrown around here. There's open space being added to the east side of the Plains property and this in all 3 variations. Is that considered a taking, so the downzoning that into no longer solely use?
Do you want to show it as a
The right side, because the other one's the flood control channel, right?
This one's the flood.
Yeah, but the right-hand side, that's new, or at least has gone. Is that a taking?
I don't think that it would be a taking because there's still a developable area within the site. And it currently serves as a buffer, although it's part of the ownership of the parcel.
Okay, because
We would definitely check with legal.
Sure, it would make sense to zone ASCOM, not make sense, it would be interesting to zone it open space recreation as a golf course or something like that, but that seemingly removes all of their rights to develop property other than a golf course or perhaps a park or something.
Yeah, and so the TDR would sort of affect that type of use without removing the development rights of the property.
And then for, the latest plan I saw from AES showed them not building on the PCH side. They don't necessarily need a plant there anymore. Does that potentially play into I mean, they may build a battery plant there, but as of right now, they're only building 2 on 1 in the upper right-hand corner that they did a swap with Edison for. So does that play into this, if we possibly rezoning that, or do general plan land use alternative in that, or is that not necessarily germane to this?
Well, in all of the alternatives, we haven't recommended any changes from the public designation. But, if that's something that that's feedback we can take back from the GPAC to the planning commission of the city council.
Okay, one more comment and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I have serious issues with that being designated as any sort of industrial anything or RT. The homeowners that live in that area have already made and voiced enough about, how they feel about certain possible things occurring in that area, and to then on top of it stick possible, anything that's other than an open space there, to me, just seems like it's dishonoring some of the residents that live in that area.
Thank you.
So I'd really like to see that maintained as some sort of open space, something for the public, a park, a baseball field, a golf course. If it is a golf course, they can still make money on it. If that's the key objective there. But to see, so my issue then with the plans that are up there is that I don't see anything on there really saying that that's what that space would be. There's too many opportunities still up there for it to be built on, from what I'm understanding, but maybe I'm completely misunderstanding.
Jessica, are you talking about the Ascon site?
Yes.
Primarily these 3 properties.
Yeah. So what would happen with where the tanks are? That though can be built on, because I thought you can't build on that either, can you? House?
That one's not part of the ASCON.
That's not part of the ASCON, okay, so it's different. So, but yeah, even like the three properties on the top, absolutely, and then the one on the bottom, like houses would be fine, but that's not getting TDR, right? So then, but yeah, so.
And those are very good points. Just to reiterate, the way this would work is, if this alternative were the one and it moved forward, is that these properties would retain the color and the designation for medium-density residential. However, we know that given this evidence, that's not likely to occur, but that there are development rights associated with that. What the general plan can do is retain this designation and those rights, but then include policies setting up the TDR program, and can go so far as to state what the preferred uses of those properties are.
Okay, I misunderstood that part.
Under
Okay.
the TDR. So if ultimately it's the community's will that become an open space, that can be stated as a policy that should the TDR be invoked, this area should go. So the general plan can go to those lengths.
Okay.
So it's really a question of.
I think that would be very important that we put some sort of stipulation like that on there.
And briefly, we're going to move on.
Suppose we don't have a TDR.
Then you got.
What we're left with is what John was suggesting is.
Theoretically, you're left with whatever the covenant says. And the medium density theoretically, you're left with medium density residential designation you can't build.
Which cannot be built. So therefore, at some point in time, and perhaps this is the time, then we can designate that if that cannot be built, then it can revert to some other type of designation, such as open space parks.
Okay, thank you. So we are going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a point in time for the GPAC members to ask questions on other matters, and we'll talk about upcoming meeting dates. So I know I'm sorry, Jeff.
On this one, I think the other thing that we want to really sort of encourage or reconsider is the option for a hybrid. And that, you might have a situation where it could be appropriate for these to go to research technology, but that this could go to residential. So I mean, there is, I guess I want to reiterate the fact that when these go forward, there is the potential for that mix and match. as well, that it doesn't have to be exclusively B or exclusively C. It can be a mixed match of those.
But that's Hamilton, so isn't the high school, yeah, the high school's right there too. RT just seems like an inappropriate place in that area of our city.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we are going to move on. So, do any of the GPAC members have additional questions on anything else?
Yeah, this is essentially our standing agenda item that we've had at our past meetings for GPAC members to ask questions of staff on essentially other planning matters that may not have directly to do with the capital plan.
Thank you, Jeff, for that clarification.
And is some of the descriptions of going through here and looking at like the enhancement and things, it talked about kind of unifying, unifying like the way like corners look, or I'm guessing that has to do something with like landscape and that kind of thing. Is that accurate? So can we put some sort of stipulation, given the current water situation in California, that it has to be like no grass, drought tolerant? Can we put limitations like that on there? No overhead sprinklers, things like this? Is that possible? And how would we go about doing that?
You do your policies.
Like through this, or like through the general plan?
For the general plan, we'll put policies in there that come up with a unifying landscape or streetscape theme that incorporate policies for, or guidelines for drought tolerant, low water usage. And, the city has an ordinance already, but, you could have a policy that says create an ordinance for this type of use, and an action item would be to go back and actually create that ordinance. And that's basically what happened the last time around. Any other questions? Okay, so now we're going to move on to, future meeting dates. So you want to discuss future meeting? Yes, so we're done with land use alternatives. Of course, as, if you guys think of anything, like in the middle of the night, it happens to me. You think of anything, if an idea pops in your head, or if a question, or, even a concern about any of these, that, you know what, we didn't think of that, or we missed that. Email me, call me, write it down on one of the cards, and send it to me, however you want to do it. Get it over. And that can occur over the next couple of weeks as we're working on it. What we'll do next, for the next and potentially final GPAC meeting, will be to talk about the key policy approaches. We then combine all of that, we'll take it to planning commission, city council, and then we draft our general plan. And EIR. So let's quickly, cleanse.
I just had a off-the-wall question. Have you ever considered the drones, the Google or somebody, or I forget who it is now being able to fly drones to deliver things? Amazon, yeah. Is there some sort of a plan for noise or anything related to that in the general plan? Very quiet.
We have to do a noise element, so that's something we can consider as we're drafting the noise element in policies.
I'm just saying it's something I think is coming, I think it's crazy, but so, and maybe like, no, maybe they can use an ASCON site for a drone.
We're looking at June 3, so the first Wednesday of June, same time, most likely same place, but we'll confirm that.
Jennifer, that was June?
June 3rd.
So it's not May?
Not May 6th. What we'll do now is we'll go back, we'll digest all of the information, we'll draft the key policies and get that ready to get out to you guys.
I just have one last question. It kind of bothers me. Why do we consider the development, residential development rights of the property owner when he's got it polluted. Either he's gonna fix it, or he can't build on it. Why are we guaranteeing him that he can, his property's gonna be worth something with these transfer of development rights? That's kind of what...
That's why I asked, what happens if we don't have the TDR?
Jeff, do you want to address that?
There is the potential going forward that when we take this to the planning commission and city council, we can bring a fourth option without the TDR showing that site as an alternative use. And that's something that we can present to the council as something that GPAC suggested. That's the option. I think it is a big decision to consider those development rights and something that we probably ought to put forward in front of the commission.
Would that trigger an inverse condemnation claim for taking?
Right now, they short themselves having $1 billion.
We're going to have to check with those guys.
No, because they can still develop to whatever is allowed, whatever they...
So you have to leave the existing zoning and general plan.
Yeah, but they're not going to be able to develop to John, to our end, okay? So it's going to be some lesser zoning designation.
The purpose of using the TDR is primarily to avoid that potential. So, that's something, there's different parties to this too. There's the property owner, there's the city, there's the DPSC, and the covenant on the property. So, again, there are certain authorities the city's going to have, there are certain authorities the city's not going to have in the situation, and it's important to recognize those distinctions and potentials, and therefore a lot of why we're carrying the TDR around is essentially for the city not to inadvertently take steps that would lead to that kind of situation.
And the DTSC would enforce the land use covenant.
But we can bring that fourth option forward for discussion and consideration.
It sounds like we'll also check with legal. I don't know that. Okay, so with that, I am going to move us on to the next item on the agenda, which is we're inviting the public to comment. So are there any members of the public that would like to address the public this time? And please use the microphone. Sorry. Hayden, with our microphone.
And we have several located throughout the room, so if anybody has a comment they want to start with, please raise your hand. Start over here.
I'm a resident here, for about 37 years, I have a background in technology. Thank you. I have a question. Somehow, I don't see what I consider to be one of our most significant assets represented in the plan, and that is the beach itself. Is that because that's out of the purview of the general plan?
No, it's just because we're not recommending any changes to the...
20 years? For 20 years?
Yeah, no, it's just going to be remaining as a beach, an open beach. There's not currently development that's allowed on the beach side, or the seaward side of PCH, and that would remain.
I have a comment in addition to my question. There is a lost opportunity between essentially the pier and Golden West. That beach is relatively undeveloped. In fact, I would say it's an eyesore. Something ought to be thought about that. It's a real lost opportunity for the community. It's a visitor-oriented, possibly commercial development.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Okay. Do we have another member of the public that would like to share?
Yeah, I just want to say that this place was pretty full. People are just getting tired of having to wait and wait and wait. It's just really hard to sit through all this. And I live off Beach Boulevard, and I absolutely hate the mega apartments on Ellis. There should be a moratorium on building apartments on Beach Boulevard. We have a severe water shortage, More people are encouraged to move to Huntington Beach. Many people can't afford to live in Huntington Beach, so they're moving out of state. I wouldn't qualify to buy my own home. I'd like you to talk to people who live by Beach Boulevard. Ask them if they want more apartments. There's an election coming up in 2016, and the people should be able to vote on land use. Let the voters decide what they want to see happen in the city.
Thank you for that comment, comments. Anyone else? Somebody else?
Hello, I'm Mark Sheldon. For full disclosure, I'm a member of the Environmental Board, although I'm saying that, speaking as a member of that, as a Huntington Beach resident. These are my personal comments. I'm also a technical consultant with background in energy and aerospace industries. Two basic comments. First of all, something that's already been voiced about the ASCON site. I wouldn't want to be the city officials trying to sell the zone, putting residential on that site, even with all the asterisks and explanations of what you're really intending to do. That's going to be a real tough sell to the public. And now, however, you have to do it in order to fulfill all the zoning requirements. You have an opportunity in the general plan to state what the actual intent is, and I think you need to avail yourselves of that opportunity. I like the idea of ultimately taking that to open space, because there is this issue of the long-term maintenance of that property and the cap, that it's going to be a lot easier if it's open space than if it's developed on. Then my other major comment is on the industrial areas, in particular the Northwest and to a lesser extent the Gothard corridor. One thing we should bear in mind here, you guys know, the people here who know me know that I'm very much a supporter of sustainable and environmentally responsible technology, and that this is no way changes this, but we need to remember that in order to that a lot of sustainability opportunities are ultimately, there's a difference between sustainable operations of a business and creating sustainable products. Creating those products often involves manufacturing, and also the other aspect that we need to remember is that a lot of the existing industrial base of the city is in aerospace. Boeing exists, even if Boeing goes away, we still have a large base of aerospace professionals in the city. And so a lot of our long-term employment is going to tend to want to still consider the aerospace industry. And so I understand the logic of rezoning portions of those areas as research and technology, the changes and allowed uses for some of those zones. However, you don't want, I would counsel against being too aggressive in taking away the availability of areas where manufacturing, light industrial, and we're not talking assembly lines. Industry today is a different animal in those industry, but you still want the capability to have responsible industrial operations for the sake of long-term economics.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for that comment. Anyone else? Yes.
My name's Bruce Warren, 26-year resident, first time here. It's very interesting. I'd like to ask a couple questions, or one question specifically, regarding like BCSP and the shortage of park space right now, and then when it gets built out, what's the plan to get back up to, I forget the numbers, 5 acres or whatever it is, back up to that is, we're not going to take places out, what's the idea or the plan to get back up to that, or is there? I like the tech research border and buffer, that sounds pretty good. Also, The TDR sounds like an incentive to grow grass or grow golf course or something like that. So that sounds all right. That's about it. Thank you.
Jeff, would you like to address the question? Jennifer?
I think the city's park standard that you're talking about is 5 acres per 1,000 residents. I'm not sure currently where we were at the last project that I worked on, when we looked at it, we were meeting that standard. I don't know at build out of the specific plan what that looks like. And I guess at this meeting, I'm not sure how to answer that since we're not addressing that here, with the general plan update.
That's a state mandated.
So, we can try to look that up. If you want to leave your contact information, we can look into that. It's not information we have here tonight because it's not being addressed in the general plan, except for we do have an open space element that's required as part of state law to be in the general plan. So we'll be looking at those policies, the actual policies, but not how specifically the beach editor specific plan will meet that.
Generally, if you get below it, and I thought I saw it was below the 5. So generally, if you get below it, what are you, we're talking about here, we gotta buy this spot over here or something like that and make it a park or extend this or something. Is that how it works?
No, how it could work is depending upon how the city council prioritizes that and how the policies are crafted, and then how it's implemented through community services use of park funds, of the park acquisition and development funds.
Okay.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Danny Cahalli. I'm a 15-year business owner. I own actually a property at 7422 Warner Avenue, and it's located in the Gothard corridor. And I haven't developed it, it's been 13 years, just because I'm limited on use. So I would like to see some changes for my unique situation, because if I do get some changes in the general plan, I am eager to develop the property. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bridget Johnson, and I'm a 50-year resident, and to give my age out, but I was listening to the comments about the Graham, McFadden, Bolson, Springdale, that whole northwest area is, and there's a lot of recreational use over there. So I mentioned the trampoline, there's like bounce you, get air, all of that. And also in the industrial over in Gothard, you have batting cages there. Matter of fact, there's some baseball batting cages over off of McFadden as well. And then you have the inline skating, the scats, all of that. So I just like to strongly encourage supporting as much recreation activity in the industrial area. I hate to see any of that minimized, especially because we have a shortage of park space for baseball and sports and all that sort of activity. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other members of the public have something to say, something to ask or share? Okay. I am going to move us on. So we will now adjourn the meeting and we'll see you here on June 3rd. Thank you so much for your time.